Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. A note for new listeners: if this is your first time joining us, part of the plan with this show is a long intro. This usually goes on for roughly 15 minutes, so if you want to get straight to the story, there is a timestamp in the show description that will get you straight there. But aside from the little bit of promotion I'm about to go into, the intro does serve a purpose, which I will get into in a few minutes, so I would suggest sticking around. Now, most podcasts put their promotion and cup rattling halfway through or at the end, but since I'm hoping that you're asleep long before we get there, I need to put this stuff up front. If you don't want to listen to it, there is this timestamp in the show notes for the main story, and I'd absolutely do not take it personally if you skip to that. But for those who have stuck around, last week was the launch of our first official sponsorship, and it's a big one. I've spoken before about how mental health is quite important to me. I've got a very minor anxiety issue. I don't even consider it much of an issue, especially in comparison with what a lot of people suffer. But I have had a lot of friends with various mental health issues, and I've seen the struggles that they have. So if you suffer with anxiety or anything else, or you just simply feel the need to talk to somebody, try out BetterHelp. That's Better, H-E-L-P. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communicating in under 24 hours once you do sign up. It is not a crisis line. It is not self-help. This is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise in their counselor network, which may not be locally available in many areas, which I also understand is a very common problem. This service is available for people worldwide, and you can log into your account at any time and send a message to your counsellor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, so that you'll never have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as with traditional therapy. People also often struggle to find a counselor with whom they really gel, so BetterHelp makes this easier by making it free and easy to change counselors if you feel the need. It is more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. If you're interested and would like to try it out, visit trybetterhelp.com/sleepytime. That's trybetterhelp.com/sleepytime. And join the over 500,000 people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. There's a special offer for Sleepy Time Tales listeners. If you sign up using the link, which you'll also find in the show notes, you will get a 10% off your first month. So once again, go to trybetterhelp.com/sleepytime and give it a try. And also, if you're finding that the show helps you to get a good night's sleep, whether it's weekly, nightly, or however often you listen, and you would like to help me to keep the show running and available for free, I'd like to ask you to consider signing up at patreon.com/sleepytimetales, also linked in the show notes, to support the work that I do, and to help Sleepy Time Tales to continue to help yourself and others. There are also bonuses available for supporters on the Patreon, so take a look at the support levels and bonuses that are available to patrons. So other than the satisfaction of helping the show to grow and reach more people, there are bonuses from shout-outs, bonus episodes, and special edits of standard episodes available. So there's something there to sweeten the pot. Also, I'm going to start doing early releases of the main episodes for all supporters. So if you would like something fresh in the midweek rather than on a Sunday night, that's going to be there for you from at any available level. And also, if you sign up at the $5 level, I will send you a fun touristy postcard from Durban, South Africa in the mail. So you'll have something tangible to look forward to. I sent some out last year, and I think they went down pretty well. And people, even in this day and age, people appreciate something physical coming in the mail. So if you're finding it beneficial and have the means and inclination to help me to keep the show going and available for hundreds or even thousands of people to help them get a good night's sleep, please consider signing up at whatever level is comfortable to you to continue supporting my work. But besides that, there's another huge way you can help to spread the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, tell them. Just let them know. And if you recommend the show on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and can thank you appropriately. You can tag me at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. And also want to shout out the music for tonight, which is Undeser Bakumiku. Their music is available on the Free Music Archive. I've linked their website and their Patreon in the show notes, as they've got some very cool stuff released under various names that I recommend checking out. Thank you, and that's back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea, isn't it? A podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find that you lie awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and stare at the ceiling, not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them, sleep was always a struggle for me. It was only quite recently in the last couple of years that I discovered the tendency for voices, especially droning male ones, to act like a tranquilizer for me. I used to lie in bed to listen to a podcast or something and then wake up when I got to the music at the end of it, having fallen asleep and missed everything that I was trying to listen to. I eventually started listening to some of these podcasts specifically for the purpose of falling asleep, until I eventually realized that there were podcasts out there intended for people to fall asleep. I tried out a couple that worked quite well for me, but when I recommended them to others, a lot of people didn't enjoy them for various reasons. So I thought to myself, I think there's a chance here for me to try help some people, use my boring, droning male voice to help people get a good night's sleep. Now, every episode starts with this long introduction. There's a little promotional bit at the beginning, which gets cut if you listen to it get it from Patreon. But most of it runs for about 15 minutes. And there are two reasons for this long intro. I'll waffle on for what seems, I'm sure, to some people like ages before getting to the story. But as I say, there are two reasons for this. One of the primary purposes of this intro is to explain the structure to new listeners, make the case for why you may find it helpful to listen to me droning on in your ear, and sort of explain the ideas and the ways I think it's best to engage with the show. For older listeners, this is a chance for them to start getting their space ready to sleep. Brush your teeth, grab a glass of water, snuggle into your blankets, make sure you're warm but not too warm, and settle into this nest that we're trying to build together. For new listeners, I think there's a couple of different ways that you can engage with the show. For me, when I listen to my sleep podcasts, I need something to focus on. I need something, a story or event or something that just keeps my mind focused on something specific to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxiety. I need to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for me. Some people, it's something a little bit more primal, I think. Some people just need a white noise in the background. The sound of waves, the sound of rain, the sound of wind, or some dude just droning on. whatever you're doing to engage with the show is perfectly valid, because at the end of the day, it's all about being here to help you get a good night's sleep. Tonight's story that I'm giving you to focus on just a little bit is an account of the basically Indian uprising against British rule. It's told from the British perspective, so be warned, it's a little bit colonial, but nothing too major and distracting, I think. But there's a very colonial sort of attitude that runs through it. So just be warned of that. But it's also quite an interesting story in and of itself. But whatever the story I tell, whether it's tonight's remembrance of colonial times past or some light sci-fi or something like that, whatever is important is you don't try force sleep. You need to just keep a light mental grip on the story, on the thread, and allow the need for sleep to just come for you. Now, obviously, if all goes well, you're going to be asleep before I get to the end of the episode. But if all doesn't go well, don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, it may not work for you. It may take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange. Maybe the idea is just quite strange and you just need to get used to it. Maybe one episode isn't long enough. I know there's at least one listener who listens to a couple of episodes. Even though he doesn't necessarily fall asleep in that time, it still finds it very relaxing and very restful, even if he's not necessarily counting sheep at the time. But whatever happens, it's very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, it may take a while. It may take a few days to work for you, and that's fine. So queue up a few episodes or just run to the backlog. What I do with the sleep podcast I listen to is I start on the latest episode and then just let them stream all night. I lie in the dark with my earbuds in and let them run. Often I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and the stream is still running. I let the voices waft me back to sleep. There are times when I wake up 30 minutes before my alarm goes. When that happens, usually I just carry on listening and I'll fall back asleep again. It seems a little bit strange, but sometimes that can be the best 30 minutes of my night. Allowing pure deep relaxation right before the alarm is just very, very satisfying. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who is elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or maybe not so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my part, a small part, to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested. One of the central things with this show is trying very hard to focus on kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And I need you to be kind to yourself. As insomniacs, I think we've all had those nights where you just get so frustrated that you can't sleep and you get angry with yourself and you start rebuking yourself. But don't do that. It doesn't help. Don't get tense if you can't get over the edge of sleep, even with me here trying to help. Frustration is an enemy of a good night's sleep. And the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration. Distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself. It's fine, just let go and try again tomorrow. If you've heard a laugh of insomnia, sleep is like an enemy, but it's not an enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and bright lights shining in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Barclay of the Guides by Herbert Strang. Available on Project Gutenberg. If you're interested, you can take a look at the link in the show notes. Preface. The Great Mutiny embraced so wide an area, in which momentous events happened almost simultaneously in places far apart, that it seemed advisable to confine the historical background of the story to the siege of Delhi, the city which was heart of the rebellion. In regard to the historical persons introduced, care has been taken to adhere as closely as possible to facts, and where the romancer's license must needs put words into their mouths, to conform to probability and their known characters. If the boys who read these pages should care to know more of the great men of whom they get glimpses, they will find a store of good things in Lumsden of the Guards by Sir Peter Lumsden, and George R. Elmsey, the Memoirs of Sir Henry Daly by Major H. Daly, a leader of Light Horse, Hodson, and The Life of John Nicholson, both by Lieutenant Colonel Trotter. The history of the mutiny, as related in the pages of Kay and Malleson, will never lose its fascination. Herbert Strang. Chapter the First. The Raid. Ahmed, son of Ramut Khan, chief of the village of Shagpur, was making his lonely way through the hills some 3 miles above his home. He could see the walled village perched on a little tract of grassy land just where the base of the hills met the sandy plain. It was 2,000 feet or more below him, and he could almost count the flat-topped houses clustered beyond his father's tower, which, though actually it rose to some height above them, dominating them, and affording an outlook over miles and miles of plain, yet appeared to Ahmed, at his present altitude, merely a patch in the general level. Between him and the village lay 3 miles of rugged grey hill country, scarred with watercourses and almost void of vegetation. A mile away, indeed, there was a long stretch of woodland, lying like a great green smudge upon the monotony of grey. It was a patch of irregular shape, narrowing here, broadening there, filling a valley which bent around towards the village. Ahmed was accustomed to shoot there occasionally, but he preferred the more exciting and more dangerous sport of hunting on the hills, where he might stalk his quarry from crag to crag, leaping ravines, warming up abrupt and precipitous cliffs, always in peril of a fall that might break his limbs, even if it did not crush the life out of him. For Ahmed was of a daring disposition, fearless, undauntable, yet possessed of a certain coolness of judgment, by which he had hitherto brought himself unscathed through 16 years of adventurous boyhood. He was a tall, slim, lissom fellow with very black hair and a swarthy skin, which set off the spotless white of his turban. He wore the loose frock and baggy trousers of the country, yet one observing him would have marked certain differences between his features and those of the Pathans among whom he dwelt. His nose was arched, but it was thinner than was usual among his countrymen. His lips were not so thick as theirs, nor was his mouth so large, and his eyes, instead of coal black, were of a curious steely grey. And anyone who saw him bathing with the lads of his village, itself a strange pastime, for the hillmen have no great partiality for water, would have been struck by the paleness of his skin where it was protected from the sun and the weather. The observer's conclusion would probably have been that Ahmed was a Pathan of a particularly refined type, and in all likelihood an offshoot of some noble family, which time's vicissitudes had reduced. Ahmed stood for a few moments looking down at Shagpur, then turned to pursue his way. He had a fowling piece slung at his back. His intention was to ascend the hills for perhaps another 1,000 feet, to a spot where he would probably come upon a small grey herd of black buck. But he had not mounted far from the place at which he had paused when he halted again, and putting his left hand above his eyes to shield them from the sun's rays, gazed steadily in a direction away from the village. Below him the plain stretched for many miles, bare and desolate, though when the rains came by and by it would be clothed with verdure. Scarcely a tree broke its level, and so parched was it now that no beast could have found sustenance there. But far away Ahmed's keen eye descried what appeared to be a speck upon the horizon, and he watched it intently. There was nothing unusual in the sight itself. Many a time he had seen just such a speck in the sky, watched it grow in breadth and height until it stretched across the plain like an immense wall, 30 miles long, 1,000 feet high. He had seen it approach like a monstrous phantom, driving before it, as it were, circling flights of kites and vultures, enveloping the bases of the hills, shutting out the sun with yellow scudding clouds. But such a dust storm ordinarily swept over the plain southwards. Ahmed had never seen one approach from the west, and after a long and steady gaze at the speck, which grew slowly in size, he suddenly dropped his hand, uttered an exclamation in the Pashto tongue, and turned his back again to retrace his course, at a speed vastly greater than that at which he had formerly been moving, towards his distant village. The moving speck had resolved itself into a band of horsemen. They had been too far away for him to distinguish individuals and know who and what they were, but considering the quarter from which they were coming, his instant thought was that they were an enemy, and it behooved him to give his people warning. In that wild country of the border, raids were frequent enough. Especially was a warning necessary today, for the village was in poor condition to defend itself. Only the day before, Rahmat Khan, his father, had ridden out with all the younger men to raid horses on the British frontier. Ahmed shrewdly suspected that tidings of this expedition had been conveyed to Mingal Khan, the chief's inveterate enemy and rival, and Mingal had taken advantage of it to make the attack for which he had no doubt long awaited a favourable occasion. And what occasion could be more favourable than the absence of the old warrior on an enterprise from which, if at once successful, he could not return for 5 or 6 days, and which, if he found himself at first balked in it, might occupy him for a fortnight. Ahmed was well aware of the danger in which Shogpur lay. The village had a high wall, but he had no belief that the gates could withstand the assault of a determined enemy. It would be something to the good, however, if the assailants could be checked for a time, and they might be checked by the shutting of the gates. But the villagers could not see from the walls the advancing band, unless there was someone on the tower, or Ahmed himself should give warning. The enemy would be upon them before the gates could be closed, and then it would be a tale of rapine and massacre. He knew that, make what speed he might, he could not, if he followed the way he had come, reach the village before the mounted men. The only chance was to gain the wood, through which, being on a level, he could run fleetly. Swerving therefore from the direct line to the village, Ahmed scrambled down the rough hillside, leaping little chasms, springing from rock to rock with the agility of a mountain goat, yet with circumspection, for should he miss his footing, a sprained ankle would be the least of his mishaps, and Shogpur lost. Down and down he went, stumbling, slipping, barking his shins, but never heeding such slight mishaps so long as nothing brought him to a check. And now, just as the dark woodland seems at his very feet, he pulls up with a sudden cry of "Hi!" For in front of him there yawns a ravine, 4 or 5 paces across and many feet deep. He glances to either side. A little to the left it narrows slightly, but only by reason of a jagged spit of rock that juts out. A spit so small as to barely afford a resting place to a foot, and every other spot the ravine is even wider than where he was brought to a halt. He waits but a moment, long enough to reflect that he dare not go the toilsome way around lest he arrive too late, and then, setting his teeth and clenching his fingers so tightly that the nails press deep into his palms, he makes a leap. Misjudgment of the distance by an inch would dash him into the chasm below, but practice had given him perfect command of his muscles. He springs lightly, confidently, his right foot lands on the precariously narrow spit of rock, and as he stoops his body he brings the left foot against the right. Then, just as it would seem that the momentum of his flight must cause him to sway and stagger and topple over sideways, he raises as on springs to his full height, and with another effort of his well-trained muscles he hurls himself from the spit onto the broader ledge behind, and is safe. Panting as he was, Ahmed sped off without delay. At last he reached the edge of the wood. He plunged into it, and finding a track which he had often followed, he ran easily as a deer. When he emerged at the other end, he dashed across the fields, green with his father's crops, and came to the gates. "Mingal Khan is upon us," he cried as he entered. Some young boys playing in the street took up the cry and ran screaming into their houses. Old Hassan, the gatekeeper, now frail and bent, but once the best rider and the cunningest horse-stealer of Shogpur, came tottering out of his hut. "Mingal Khan, say you, Ahmed Ji? That son of a dog. and he slammed to the gates and barred them, muttering curses on the enemy. By this time, the cries of the children had brought the villagers into the street. They were for the most part old men and feeble. The young and able-bodied were with Ramat Khan, but there were among them a few men in the prime of life and some boys of about Ahmed's age. Breathlessly, he told them what he had seen. "The gates are but as ghee to Mingal," cried old Hassan. "They will not keep him out till the sun sets." "Then we will go into the tower," said Ahmed, "and shut ourselves up there until my father's return." He ran into his father's house and brought out the chief's 2 wives and 3 daughters, who fled swiftly to the tower upon the wall. Then, with the aid of some of the people, he collected what provisions he could. The women filled their brass pots with water at the well and carried them on their heads to the tower. Men followed them with arms and ammunition and with strong bulks of wood for barricading the foot of the winding stair. Within 10 minutes of Ahmed's arrival in the village, all who chose had shut themselves up within the refuge. Not all chose. Even while these preparations were being made, some of the men held aloof. Mingal Khan was a younger, wealthier, and more powerful chief than Ramut. What was the good of holding out against him? There had been for many years a feud between them. Such an attack as was now imminent might long have been foreseen. The more powerful must win. It was fate. Had they not known many such cases? Was it not better to yield to the enemy at once and make their peace with him? Ahmed and older Hassan hotly protested, appealing to their loyalty, reminded them of what their chief's anger would bring when he came back and found that they had betrayed him. These appeals were effective with the bolder spirits, but there was still a good proportion of the villagers who foresaw that their chief's dominion was at an end, and were eager to make their own future secure by nailing the rising sun. These remained in the village street, and when, a few minutes after Ahmed and his party had shut themselves in the tower, the band of horsemen, 50 strong, with Mingal at the head, rode up to the gates and demanded admittance. One of the disaffected removed the bars and made humble obeisance as the rival chief entered. The newcomers uttered loud shouts of exultation at the ease of their victory, not at first aware of the resolute little band in the tower. It was only when Mingal had entered the chief's house and found it deserted that he suspected what had happened. Then, with a grim smile, he questioned the villagers, all most obsequious to their new master. And Ahmed, watching the scene from a lattice window high up in the tower, wondered what the smile portended. He expected to see Mingal's men collect the grainstuffs and everything else of value that the village contained, and then set fire to the houses. But old Hassan by his side, better acquainted with the long feud which had existed between the 2 chiefs, stroked his beard and groaned. Hi, he muttered. It has come at last. But I am too old to serve a new master. Shagpur will have another gatekeeper now, Ahmed Ji. What meanest thou, old man? Asked Ahmed, wondering. Mingal has come not for plunder, but for mastery, was the reply. 'Tis what he has meditated for a dozen years, and who can strive against fate. When the master comes back, he will find that Shagpur is no longer his. If he resists, he will be slain. If he accepts his lot, he will be loaded with chains or cast out of the village, a beggar to the end of his days. And what of us then? Asked Ahmed. Aye, said the old man. As for you, I speak not, Ahmed Ji. But for me, I am too old, as I have said. I have my knife. Ahmed looked into the gatekeeper's face. He read there neither fear nor despair, nothing but a calm resolution. Then he uttered a scornful laugh. No one can strive against fate, truly, he said. But who knows that fate has given us into Mingal's hand, by the beard of the Prophet our son. But the old man put his hand on the boy's mouth. Hush, Ahmed Ji, he said with a sort of stern tenderness. 'Tis not meet, little one, that oath in your mouth. You have well nigh forgotten, but I do not forget. We are as we were born, and you were born a Ferengi. Chapter the 2nd. 8 years before this raid of Mingal's on Shagpur, a small boy, dark, bright-eyed, happy-looking, was sitting on the grass at some little distance from an open tent, nursing a wooden sword and trying to make conversation in babbling Urdu with a big, swarthy, bearded Pathan who squatted opposite him, and smiled as he tried to understand and answer the little fellow's questions. From the tent came the sound of voices, and the Pathan would now and then lift his eyes from the child and dart a keen glance towards the spot where Mr. George Barclay, Deputy Commissioner of the district, was engaged in dealing with one of the troublesome cases that came before him for settlement. For many years, the dwellers in the plains of the Punjab had suffered from the encroachments of their neighbours in the hills. At first, these hillmen only came to the plains in winter-time, when their own bare lands became uninhabitable from frost and snow, and returned in the summer, when they might find sustenance for their flocks and good hunting. But seeing the weakness of the plain dwellers and the fertility of their soil, the hillmen had not been satisfied with paying these winter visits, and after remaining as uninvited guests, returning to their own place without having made a domicile in the plains, they began to regard the land on which they had temporarily settled as theirs, and by exacted tribute from the rightful owners. Thus they became possessed of 2 homes, one for the winter, one for the summer. Naturally, the seizure of property was little to the liking of the plains dwellers. They made some resistance and fought the oppressors, but were no match in arms for the more warlike hillmen. When, however, the Punjab were incorporated in the dominions of John Company, some of the dispossessed landowners took advantage of the well-known respect of the British for law to make an attempt to recover their property through the agency of their new rulers, and it was to show cause why he should not yield the lands he held in the plain that Mingal Khan, one of the hill chieftains, had been summoned before the Deputy Commissioner. Mingal obeyed the summons grudgingly. In the hills he was free and owned no master save God. It irked him that anyone, least of all the Sahib Log, infidels, eaters of pigs, should question his rights in the plains. For though he knew that the lands in dispute were not his by inheritance, yet might was right, and if the plain men were not strong enough to hold them, why so much the worse for them? And when he came down from the hills to argue the case before the British Commissioner, he begged his nearest neighbour, Ramat Khan of Shogpur, to accompany him and give him at least moral support. Ramat did not refuse his request, but he was above all things a warrior. He had no skill in reasoning like his more wily neighbour Mingal, and while the latter was using all his eloquence, every trick and artifice of which he was capable, to persuade Mr. Barclay that forcible possession was of more account than title deeds, Ramat amused himself by talking to and playing with the Deputy Commissioner's little son. The boy's mother had died in Lahore some little while before, and his father kept him constantly in his company, even when his duties called him into remote parts of his district. Ramat, like all of his race, was passionately fond of children. The fearlessness of the bright-eyed boy appealed to him, and day after day, while Mingal was waiting his turn, and when he was trying Mr. Barclay's patience inside the tent, Ramat spent hours with the boy, giving him rides on his horse, laughing as he strutted by with a wooden sword, allowing him to fire a shot or 2 from his pistol. And so, by the time Mingal's case was decided, Ramat and Jim Barclay, the big, bearded Pathan warrior of near 60 years, and the English boy of 8 were fast friends. Mingal lost his case. The Deputy Commissioner decided against him and gave judgment that he must quit the lands he had usurped. Mingal left the tent in a rage, muttering curses on the infidel dog who had rejected, quietly but firmly, all his pleas, and declaring to Ramat that he would one day have his revenge. Ramat was not a whit more friendly disposed to the new rulers than was Mingal himself, but he was a man of few words and never threatened what he could not at once perform. Moreover, he had never thought much of his neighbour's case and was not surprised at its failure. Mingal found him less sympathetic than he considered his due and returned to his home in the hills in a very ill humour. The opportunity for vengeance came sooner than he could have expected. In the spring of the next year, when a civil servant named Vans Agnew and Lieutenant Anderson of the Bombay Army were escorting a new Diwan or governor to the city of Multan, they were treacherously attacked, and their murder was the signal for a general uprising of the Sikh soldiery. News of the rebellion was carried through the country with wonderful speed. It came to the ears of Ramat and Mingal, and fretting as they were under the restraints imposed upon them by the proximity of the British, they resolved at once to make common cause with the revolted Sikhs. It happened that Mr. Barclay had lately gone into camp at a spot very near the place where he had given his decision against Mingal. The Pathan chief set off with their armed followers, rushed Mr. Barclay's almost unprotected camp, for he had as yet heard nothing of the revolt at Multan, and the deputy commissioner, without a moment's warning, was shot through the heart. His little son would have suffered the same fate, so bitter was the tribesman's enmity against all the Ferengis. But for Ramut, who remembered how much he had been attracted by the boy, and saw an opportunity for which he had yearned, of providing himself with an heir. One of his wives, now dead, had borne him 2 sons, but both had died fighting against Ranjit Singh, and his 2 living wives had given him only daughters. In such cases it was common for a chief to adopt a son and make him his heir. Ramut, now getting on in years, had envied the English sahib who was blessed with a boy so sturdy and frank and fearless. While Mingal, therefore, was wreaking his vengeance on the father, Ramut caught up the son, set him on a saddlebow, and forbade any of his men to lay hands on him. He had resolved to take the boy back with him by and by to Shagpur, to bring him up as a Pathan, and if he proved worthy, to proclaim him his heir. Mingal was very indignant when the old chief announced his intention. The boy, he protested, was an infidel dog. It was a shame to a Pathan and a follower of the Prophet to show kindness to any of the hated race who had laid their hands on this land, claiming tribute from the free men of the hills, deposing and setting up governors at their will. But Ramut would not be denied. Mingal dared not cross the old warrior. For the moment he appeared to acquiesce, but in his heart he hated his neighbour chief, and resolved from that time to set himself in rivalry against him. If he could not remove the boy, he could at least bide his time, and when Ramut's time came to die, it should be seen whether he could not rely on racial and religious prejudice to prevent the scandal of a tribe being ruled by an infidel Ferengi. Ramut kept the boy with him in the Punjab through the campaign. He joined forces with the troops sent by the king of Kabul to the assistance of the Sikhs. He fought in the terrible battle of Chilianwala. Having Gough finally routed his brave enemy at Gujarat, he fled with the Afghans and Pathans to the inaccessible hills, escaped the pursuit of the company's troops, and reached in safety his mountain home at Shagpur. Then he carried out his intention. He called the boy Ahmed and had him trained in the Mohammedan faith by the mullah of the village, who taught him to read the Quran, though being in Arabic he was never understood a word of it. Ahmed wore a white turban, kept the Musalman, fasts and feasts, and though he was at first very miserable and wept often for the father he had lost, he gradually forgot his early life and delighted in his new father's heart, as he grew up a straight, sturdy Pathan boy. Ramut was wonderfully kind to him. His wives were at first jealous of the boy, and there were some in the village who never lost their first distrust and envy of him. But as years passed by and Ahmed proved himself to be bold and daring as he was sunny-tempered, as good at hunting and warlike exercises as he was in the ritual of religion, he became a favorite with most. The chief visited with heavy punishment some who dared to give expression to their resentment at his adoption of a Ferengi boy, and after that the ill feeling died down, and if any remained, it found an outlet only in murmurs which the envious ones were careful to keep from their chief's ears. Ahmed was now 16. He was his adoptive father's constant companion at home, but the old chief, while he allowed the boy to take part in his hunting expeditions, would never permit him to share in the raids which he sometimes made on the villages of his neighbours, nor in the horse-stealing enterprises he ventured in the British lines. He seemed to be beset by a fear lest the boy should be snatched from him, and in particular he dreaded lest any contact with the British should awake dormant recollections in his mind, and be the means of carrying him back to his own people. The only experience Ahmed had of contests with men had been gained in occasional attacks on caravans of merchants as they passed between Persia and Afghanistan. But now that the boy was 16, Ahmed thought it was high time. He should be married in accordance with the customs of his country, and was looking out for a suitable bride. The old chief argued that when Ahmed was married there would be less likelihood of his ever wishing to leave his tribe, and he might then be given a greater freedom and take a full share in all activities. Though Ahmed thus had few enemies in Shagpur itself, there was one in Bengal's village of Mandan who caused Ramit Khan some anxiety. This was his nephew Dilsa, a man near 40 years old. Dilsa had expected to succeed his uncle in the chiefship, but he was an idle, ill-conditioned fellow, not without a certain fierce bravery when roused, but little inclined to bestir himself without great cause, exceedingly fond of eating and very fat. For him, Ramot had the deepest contempt. There was yet a stormy scene between uncle and nephew when the Ferengi boy was brought into the village and formally adopted by the old chief. Ramot poured out his scorn upon Dolasa, and the latter withdrew in high wrath and indignation from the village and joined himself to Mingol's folk. Ramot was at first glad to be rid of him, but as years passed and Mingol, by cunning wiles and stealthy diplomacy, increased his influence in the country and drew more and more men to his tribe, the chief of Shogpur foresaw that one day he might have serious trouble with his rival, and that the succession of Ahmed would be disputed. But he hoped that he would live long enough to see the boy develop into a full-grown warrior, able to hold his own by force of arms if the need should arise. If he had guessed that his absence on the horse-stealing expedition would be taken advantage of by his enemy, he would without doubt have remained at home. But he had heard that Mingol had gone westward to intercept a caravan of cloth merchants on the road to Kabul. It was a trick of Mingol's to draw the old man out of the way, and thus it happened that the village was so poorly defended when Mingol made his attack. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website, which you will find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.